Hi, and welcome back to Boccaccio and Wigs. I've picked out a lovely green number for you today to kick off our first story. This is the first of 100 stories in the Decameron. Day one, story one. 1 and 1. That's not 2. Our queen for the day, Pampinea, handed things over to Panfilo to delight the brigata with the first story. So it's the hot part of the day in the afternoon, and our young people are relaxing under a tree. Now, at the beginning of each story, you will see day one, story one, you have a short little summary that kind of helps you keep track of all the different stories. So I'll read that and then dive into the story. Cepparello tricks a holy friar with a false confession and dies. Although he was a very evil man during his lifetime, he is after death reputed to be a saint and is called Saint Ciappelletto. All right. Now, imagine Panfilo is your storyteller. Dearest ladies, it is fitting that everything done by man should begin with the marvelous and holy name of him who was the creator of all things. Therefore, since I am to be the first to begin our storytelling, Panfilo, I intend to start with one of his marvelous deeds, so that when we have heard about it, our faith in him will remain as firm as ever, and his name be ever praised by us. It is clear that since earthly things are all transitory and mortal, they are in themselves full of worries, anguish, and toil, and are subject to countless dangers, which we who live with them and are part of them could neither endure nor defend ourselves from if strength and foresight were not granted to us through God's special grace. Nor should we believe that such special grace descends upon us and within us through any merit of our own, but rather it is sent by his own kindness and by the prayers of those who, like ourselves, were mortal and who have now become eternal and blessed with him, for they followed his will while they were alive. To these saints, as to advocates who from experience are aware of our weakness, we ourselves offer our prayers concerning those matters we deem desirable, because we are not brave enough to offer them to so great a judge directly. And yet in him we discern his generous mercy towards us. And since the human eye cannot penetrate the secrets of the divine mind in any way, it sometimes happens that, deceived by popular opinion, we choose as an advocate before his majesty one who is sentenced by him to eternal exile. So I think he's saying that we feeble humans aren't always the best judge of character. Nevertheless, he to whom nothing is hidden pays more attention to the purity of the one who prays than to his ignorance or the damnation of his intercessor, and answers those who pray to him just as if these advocates were blessed in his presence. All this will become most evident in the tale I'm about to tell. I say evident in accordance with the judgment of men and not that of God, because God knows everything. Now, you'll notice that there's a lot of references among this group to, being beyond reproach and being mindful of their faith and not getting into trouble, not being tempted, because they're a group of young adults. So they will refer often to this, idea of mischief or temptation. And he's also talking about, in this particular passage, he's talking about the intercessor being like someone in the church, someone who's in the clergy. And Boccaccio has some strong opinions, I guess, about some of the hypocrisy that he observed in organized religion, which that hasn't changed at all, has it? No. All right. Now, there was a very rich man named Musciato Francesi, who was a famous merchant in France and had become a knight. He was obliged to come to Tuscany with Lord Charles Landless, the brother of the King of France, who had been sent for and encouraged to come by Pope Boniface. Musciato found that his affairs, like those of most merchants, were so entangled and every which way that he could not easily or quickly liquidate them. So he decided to entrust them to a number of different people, and he found a means of disposing of everything. Only one difficult thing remained to be done: to find a person capable of recovering certain loans made to several people in Burgundy. So he needed somebody to go break some legs. Well, maybe. The reason for his hesitation was that he had been told the Burgundians were a quarrelsome lot of evil disposition and disloyal, and he could not think of an equally evil man in whom he could place his trust, who might be able to match their wickedness with his own. After thinking about this matter for a long time, he remembered a certain Ser Cepparello from Prato, who had often been a guest in his home in Paris. This person was short, and he dressed with an affected kind of elegance, and the French, who did not know the meaning of the word Cepparello, believing it meant capello in their tongue garland, used to call him Ciappelletto. There we go. He was known to everyone, and few knew him as Ser Cepparello. So we've got a little confusion over pronunciation of his name, which I can certainly relate to. Ciappelletto was by profession a notary. He was very much ashamed when any of his legal documents, of which he drew up many, was discovered to be anything but fraudulent. So he's a con man. He would have drawn up free of charge as many false ones as were requested of him, and more willingly than another man might have done for a large sum of money. So he takes pleasure in deceiving people. He gave false testimony with the greatest of pleasure, whether he was asked to give it or not. And since in those days in France great faith was placed on sworn oaths, and since he did not object to taking a false oath, he won a great many lawsuits through his wickedness every time he was called on to swear upon his faith to tell the truth. He took special pleasure and went to a great deal of trouble to stir up scandal, mischief, and enmities between friends, relatives, and anyone else, and the more evil that resulted from it, the happier he was. If he was asked to be a witness at a murder or at any other criminal affair, he would attend very willingly, never refusing, and he frequently found himself happily wounding or killing men with his very own hands. He was a great blasphemer of God and the saints, losing his temper at the slightest pretext, as if he were the most irascible man alive. He never went to church, and he made fun of all the church's sacraments, using abominable language to revile them. On the other hand, he frequented taverns and other dens of iniquity with great pleasure. He was as fond of women as dogs are of a beating with a stick. He was, in fact, more fond of men, more so than any other degenerate. He could rob and steal with a conscience as clean as a holy man making an offering. He was such a great glutton and big drinker that he often suffered the filthy price of his overindulgence. He was a gambler who frequently used loaded dice. What doesn't this guy do? But why am I wasting so many words on him? He was probably the worst man that ever lived. His cunning for a long time had served the wealth and the authority of Messer Moschiato, on whose behalf he was many times spared both by private individuals, whom he often abused, and by the courts, which he always abused. When this Ser Cepparello came to the mind of Messer Moschiato, who was well acquainted with his way of life, he decided that this was just the man to deal with the evil nature of the Burgundians. And summoning him, he spoke as follows. Ser Ciappelletto, as you know, I am about to leave here for good, and since, among others, I have to deal with these jerky Burgundians, I know of no one more qualified than yourself to recover my money from them. And since you are doing nothing else at the moment, if you look after this matter for me, I shall gain the favor of the court for you, and I shall give you a just portion of what you manage to recover. Ser Ciappelletto, then unemployed and in short supply of worldly goods, saw refuge and support about to depart, and without further delay, constrained, as if it were by necessity, made up his mind and announced that he would be happy to go. Sounds like he didn't have a lot going for him. After they had made their agreement and Ser Ciappelletto had received the power of attorney and necessary letters of recommendation from the king, Messer Moschiato, departed, and Ciappelletto went to Burgundy, where hardly a soul knew him. And there, in a kind and gentle manner, unlike his nature, he began to collect the debts and to do what he had been sent to do. It was almost as though he were saving all his anger for the conclusion of his visit. And while he was doing this, he was lodged in the home of 2 Florentine brothers who lent money at usurious rates and who showed him great respect out of their love for Messer Moschiato. During this time, he fell ill. The 2 brothers had doctors and nurses brought in immediately to care for him, and they provided everything necessary to restore his health. But all help was useless, for the good man, according to what the doctors said, was already old and had lived a disordered life, and every day his condition went from bad to worse, like someone with a fatal illness. The brothers were most concerned about this, and one day, standing rather close to the bedchamber where Ser Ciappelletto lay ill, they began talking to each other. "What are we going to do with him?" said one to the other. "We're in a fix on this account. Throwing him out of our house, as sick as he is, would surely earn us reproaches and would obviously make little sense, since people have seen how we received him at first and then how we had him cared for and treated so well. And now what will they say if they see him at the point of death being thrown out of our house, all of a sudden without having done anything to displease us? On the other hand, he has been such a wicked man that he does not wish to confess himself or to receive any of the church's sacraments. And if he dies without confession, no church will wish to receive his body, and it will be thrown into a ditch just like a dead dog. And suppose he does confess, his sins are so many and so horrible that the same thing will happen, since neither friar nor priest will be willing or able to absolve him, and so without absolution he will be thrown into a ditch just the same. And if this happens, the people of this city, who already speak badly of us because of our profession, loan sharks basically, which they consider iniquitous, and who wish to rob us, will rise up in a mob when they see this and cry out, 'Those Lombard dogs are not accepted by the church. We won't put up with them any longer.' They will run to our house and rob us not only of our property, but of our lives as well. In any case, we are in trouble if he dies." Ser Ciappelletto, who, as we said, was lying near the place where they were talking, had sharp ears, as is often the case with the sick, and he heard what they said about him. He had them summoned and told them, "I don't want you to worry on my account or be afraid that you will suffer because of me. I heard what you said about me, and I'm very sure that things would indeed happen as you say they would if everything went as you think it might. But things will turn out differently. Since I have committed so many offenses against God during my lifetime, committing one more against him now will make no difference. So find me the most holy and worthy priest that you can, if such a one exists, and leave everything to me. For I guarantee you that I shall set both your affairs and mine in order in a way that will satisfy you." Although the 2 brothers did not feel very hopeful about this, they went, nevertheless, to a monastery of friars and asked for some holy and wise priests to hear the confession of a Lombard who had fallen ill in their home. And they were given an old friar who was a good and holy man, an expert in the scriptures, and a most venerable man for whom all the citizens had a very great and special devotion. And they took him with them. When the friar reached the bedchamber where Ser Ciappelletto was lying, he sat down at his side. First he began to comfort him kindly, and then he asked him how long it had been since his last confession. To this question, Ser Ciappelletto, who had never in his life made a confession, replied, "Father, I usually confess myself at least once a week, but there were many weeks that I confessed more often. And the truth is that since I have been ill, almost 8 days now, I have not been to confession. So grave has been my illness." Then the friar said, "Oh, my son, you have done well, and you must continue to do so. But I see that since you have confessed so often, there will be little for me to ask or listen to." Ser Ciappelletto replied, "Father, don't say that. I have never confessed so many times or so often that I have not always wished to confess again all the sins I can remember from the day of my birth to the moment I am confessing. Therefore, I beg you, my good father, that you ask me point by point about everything, as if I had never confessed before. And do not let my illness stand in your way, for I prefer to mortify this flesh of mine rather than, in treating gently, do something that might lead to the perdition of my soul, which our Savior has redeemed from his precious blood." These words pleased the holy man very much, and they seemed to him to be the sign of a well-disposed mind. And after he had commended Ser Ciappelletto highly for his practice, he began by asking him if he had ever sinned in lust with any woman. To this, Ser Ciappelletto replied with a sigh, "Father, on this account I am ashamed to tell the truth for fear of sinning from pride." To this, the friar answered, "Speak freely, for the truth was never a sin, either in confession or elsewhere." Then Ser Ciappelletto said, "Since you assure me that this is the case, I shall tell you. I am as virgin today as when I came from my mother's womb." "Oh, you are blessed by God," said the friar. "How well you have done, and in so doing you merit even more praise, for you have enjoyed more freedom to do the opposite than we and others who are bound by religious rules enjoy." Then he asked if he had displeased God through the sin of gluttony. To this, breathing a heavy sigh, Ser Ciappelletto replied that he had, and many times, for in addition to the periods of fasting which are observed during the year by the devout, he fasted every week for at least 3 days on bread and water, but he had drunk the water with the same delight and appetite as any great drinker of wine would, especially after he had worn himself out in prayer or in going on a pilgrimage. And he had often longed for one of those little salads made of wild herbs, the kind women make out in the country. And on occasion, eating had seemed better to him than it should have seemed to someone like himself who fasted out of religious devotion. To this, the friar replied, "My son, these sins are natural ones and are very minor. Therefore, I do not want you to burden your conscience with them more than necessary. No matter how very holy he may be, every man thinks that eating after a long fast and drinking after hard work is good." "Oh, Father," said Ser Ciappelletto, "don't say this just to console me. As you well know, things done in God's service should be done completely and without any hesitation. Anyone who does otherwise sins." The friar, who was most pleased to hear this, said, "I am happy that you feel this way, and your pure and good conscience pleases me very much. But tell me, have you ever committed the sin of avarice by coveting more than was proper, or by keeping what you should not have kept?" To this, Ser Ciappelletto answered, "Father, do not suspect me of this because I am in the home of these usurers. I have nothing whatsoever to do with their profession. On the contrary, I came here to admonish and chastise them and to save them from this abominable kind of profit-taking. And I believe that I might have accomplished this if God had not struck me down in this manner. But you should know that my father left me a rich man. And when he died, I gave the larger part of his possessions to charity. Then, to sustain my life and to enable me to aid Christ's poor, I carried on my little business deals. And while in my work I did wish to make a profit, I always divided these profits with God's poor, giving 1/2 to them and keeping the other half for my own needs. And my Creator has aided me so well in this regard that my business affairs have always prospered." "Well done," replied the friar. Well done, replied the friar. "But now, how many times have you lost your temper?" "Oh," said Ser Ciappelletto, "I certainly have, and very often. And who could keep himself from doing so, seeing all around me every day men doing evil deeds, disobeying God's commandments and not fearing his judgments? Many times there have been days I would have rather been dead than live to see young men chasing after the vanities of this world, and to hear them swear and perjure themselves, to see them going to taverns, not going to church, and pursuing the ways of the world rather than those of God." Then the friar said, "My son, this is righteous anger, and I can impose no penance upon you for that. But by any chance did your wrath ever lead you to commit murder, or to abuse anyone, or to do any kind of injury?" To this, Ser Ciappelletto answered, "Alas, Father, how could you say such things and be a man of God? If I had ever so much as thought about doing any of those things you mentioned, do you believe that God would have done so much for me? These things are for criminals and evil men, and every time I met such a man, I always said, 'Begone, and may God convert you.'" Then the friar said, "May God bless you, my son. Have you ever given false testimony against anyone, or spoken ill of anyone, or taken their property against their will?" "Yes, indeed," answered Ser Ciappelletto. "I have spoken ill of others, for I once had a neighbor who did nothing but beat his wife unjustly. And one time I spoke badly about him to his wife's relatives. Such was the pity I had for that poor creature. Only God can tell you how he beat her every time he drank too much." Then the friar said, "Now then, you tell me you've been a merchant. Have you ever tricked anyone?" Then the friar said, "Now then, you tell me you've been a merchant. Have you ever tricked anyone, as merchants are wont to do?" "Of course," replied Ser Ciappelletto, "but I do not know who he was. All I know is that he was a man who brought me money which he owed me for some cloth I sold him, and I put it in my strong box without counting it. A month later, I discovered that he had given me 4 pieces more than he owed me. And since I saved the money for more than a year in order to return it to him, but did not see him again, I finally donated it to charity." "That was a small matter," said the friar, "and you did well in doing what you did with it." And besides this, the holy friar asked him about many other matters, always receiving from him similar replies. And as he was about to give him absolution, Ser Ciappelletto said, "Father, there is another sin which I have not mentioned." The friar asked him what it was, and he answered, "I recall that one Saturday after the hour of nones, which we know is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I had my servant sweep the house, and did therefore not show the proper reverence for the holy Sabbath." "Oh," said the friar, "that is a minor matter, my son." "No," said Ser Ciappelletto, "don't call it a minor matter. Sunday can never be honored too much, for on that day our Savior rose from the dead." Then the friar asked, "What else have you done?" "Father," replied Ser Ciappelletto, "one time without thinking I spat in the house of God." The friar began to smile and said, "My son, that is nothing to worry about. We priests who are religious men spit there all day long." Then Ser Ciappelletto said, "Then you do great harm, for no place should be kept as clean as a holy temple in which we give sacrifice to God." And in brief, he told the friar many things of this sort, and finally he began to sigh and then to weep loudly, which he was very good at doing whenever he wished. Got some crocodile tears. The holy friar asked, "My son, what's the matter?" Ser Ciappelletto replied, "Alas, Father, there is one remaining sin which I shall never confess. Such is the shame I have of mentioning it. And every time it comes to mind, I cry as you see me doing now. And I feel sure that God will never have mercy on me because of such a sin." Then the holy man said, "Now there, my son, what's this you're saying? If all the sins which were ever committed by all men, or which will ever be committed as long as the world lasts, were all in one man, and he was as penitent and contrite as I see you are, the kindness and mercy of God is so great that if he were to confess, God would freely forgive all of those sins. Therefore, speak without fear." Still crying loudly, Ser Ciappelletto said, "Alas, Father, mine is too great a sin, and I can hardly believe that God will forgive me unless your prayers are forthcoming." To this the friar replied, "Speak freely, for I promise to pray to God for you." But Ser Ciappelletto kept on crying without speaking while the friar continued urging him to speak. But after Ser Ciappelletto had kept the friar in suspense with his prolonged weeping, he heaved a great sigh and said, "Father, since you promised to pray to God on my behalf, I shall tell you. When I was just a little boy, I cursed my mother one time. Oh!" And having said this, he began crying loudly again. The friar answered, "Now there, my son, does this seem like such a great sin to you? Oh, men curse God all day, and he gladly forgives those who repent for having blasphemed against him. Do you not believe that he will forgive you as well? Do not cry, take comfort, for he will surely forgive you with the contrition I see in you, even if you were one of those who placed him upon the cross." Then Ser Ciappelletto said, "Alas, father, what are you saying? My sweet mother, who carried me in her womb 9 months, day and night, and who took me in her arms more than 100 times. Cursing her was too evil, and the sin was too great. If you do not pray to God on my behalf, he will not forgive me." When the friar saw Ser Ciappelletto had nothing more to say, he absolved him and gave him his blessing, thinking him to be the most holy man, just as he fully believed everything Ser Ciappelletto had told him. And who would not have believed it, seeing a man at the point of death confess in such a way? And then, after all this, he said to him, "Ser Ciappelletto, with the help of God, you will soon be well. But if it happens that God calls your blessed and well-disposed soul to himself, would you like to have your body buried in our monastery?" To this, Ser Ciappelletto answered, "Yes, sir, I would. Nor would I want to be anywhere else, since you have promised to pray to God for me. Moreover, I have always been especially devoted to your order. Therefore, when you return to your monastery, I beg you to send me that most true body of Christ which you consecrate each morning upon the altar, although I am not worthy of it, so that I may, with your permission, partake of it. And afterward may I receive holy extreme unction, for if I have lived as a sinner, at least I shall die as a Christian." The holy man said that he would be pleased to do this, and that he had spoken well, and that he would arrange it so that the sacrament should be brought to him immediately. The two brothers, who had strongly suspected that Ser Ciappelletto would trick them, had placed themselves near a partition which divided the bedchamber where Ser Ciappelletto was lying from another room, and as they listened, they could easily overhear and understand everything Ser Ciappelletto said to the friar. And at times they had such a desire to break out laughing that they would from time to time say to each other, "What kind of man is this? Neither old age, nor illness, nor fear of death, which is so close, nor fear of God, before whose judgment he must soon stand, has been able to turn him from his wickedness or make him wish to die differently from the manner in which he has lived." But when they heard it announced that he would be received for burial in the church, they did not worry about anything else. Shortly afterwards, Ser Ciappelletto took communion, and growing worse without remedy, he received extreme unction. And just after Vespers, on the same day during which he had made his good confession, he died. Whereupon the two brothers, using his own money, took all the necessary measures to bury him honorably, and they sent word to the friar's monastery for them to watch over the body during the evening according to custom, and to come forward in the morning. The holy friar that had confessed him, hearing that he had passed away, went to the prior of the monastery and had the assembly bell rung. And to the assembled friars he described what a holy man Ser Ciappelletto had been, according to what he had been able to learn from his confession. And hoping that God might perform many miracles through him, he convinced his brothers that they ought to receive his body with the greatest reverence and devotion. The prior and other friars, all of them gullible, agreed to this. And in the evening, when they went to where the body of Ser Ciappelletto was lying, they held a great and solemn vigil over it. And the following morning, chanting and all dressed in their vestments, with their prayer books in hands and preceded by their crosses, they went to get his body. And with the greatest ceremony and solemnity, they carried it to their church, followed by almost every person in the city, men and women alike. Once the body had been placed in the church, the holy friar who had confessed him mounted the pulpit and began to preach marvelous things about him and his life, his fastings, his virginity, his simplicity, innocence, and holiness, recounting among other things what Ser Ciappelletto had tearfully confessed to him as his greatest sin, and describing to them how he was scarcely able to convince him that God might forgive him for it. From this he turned to reprove the people who were listening, and he said, "And you, God's wretched sinners, blaspheme against him, his mother, and all the saints in paradise, when a little blade of straw is cut under your feet." And besides this, he said a good deal more about his loyalty and his purity. In short, with his words, which were taken by the people of the countryside as absolute truth, he fixed Ser Ciappelletto so firmly in the minds and the devotions of all those who were present there, that after the service was over, everyone pressed forward to kiss the hands and feet of the deceased. And all his garments were torn off his corpse, since anyone who could get hold of a piece of them considered himself blessed. They wanted a souvenir. And it was necessary to keep his body there the entire day, so that all those who wanted were able to look upon him. Then the following night he was honorably buried in a chapel within a marble tomb, and immediately the next morning people began going there to light candles and to worship him and to make vows to him and to hang wax images as ex votos. And meanwhile, the fame of his sanctity and the devotion in which he was held grew so much that no other saint received as many vows as he did from every poor person who found himself in difficulty. And they called him, and still continue to call him, Saint Ciappelletto. And they claim that God has performed many miracles through him and continues to perform them to this day for anyone who seeks his intercession. It was in this manner, then, that Ser Ciappelletto of Prato lived and died and became a saint, just as you have heard. Nor do I wish to deny that it might be possible for him to be in the blessed presence of God, since although his life was evil and sinful, he could have become so truly sorry at his last breath that God might well have had pity on him and received him into his kingdom. This is hidden from us, but from what is clear to us, I believe that he is instead in the hands of the devil in hell rather than in paradise. And if this is the case, we can recognize the greatness of God's mercy towards us, which pays more attention to the purity of our faith than to our errors, by granting our prayers in spite of the fact that we choose his enemy as our intercessor, fulfilling our requests to him just as if we had chosen a true saint as intermediary for his grace. And so that we may be kept healthy and safe through the present adversity, and in this joyful company by his grace, praising the name of him who began our storytelling, let us hold him in reverence and commend ourselves to him when we are in need, being most certain that we shall be heard. And here Panfilo fell silent. Now, when he talks about intercession on one's behalf, he's basically saying, you know what, if you prayed through this friar or this saint who actually was a really horrible human being, it doesn't really matter because God knows, and I'm all for that. So I hope you enjoyed Day 1, Story 1.